Okay, this is the big one. This is talking about the new forgiveness form, okay? The SBA has put out a new forgiveness form. This is the one we've been waiting for. This is the forgiveness form that's going to be for every single person who got a loan under $150,000. And they didn't give us a new number. We don't have a new form name. What they did is they edited the 3508S, and now we have a new 3508S. We have a revised 3508S, okay? So as much as we thought, hey, maybe they're gonna bring out a new 3508 something, because we had just the regular 3508 and then we had the EZ and then we had the 3508S, what they've done is they've just edited, moved around, packed a bunch of extra stuff into this form, and they've kind of completely redone it and rethought it, I guess. So, as you guys probably know, if you've been keeping up with this, you knew that when the Economic Aid Act was passed, which was in December, end of December 2020, they decided to say, hey, for loans under $150,000, we're going to make the forgiveness process easier. Because remember, we're talking about forgiveness. I know when the time that this video is posted, there's lots of people working on their application, but we also have lots of people still working through their forgiveness. Okay, so this is for the forgiveness application. When you go, you've spent all your money and you're going to apply for forgiveness, this is the information that you need if you have a loan under $150,000. If you have a loan over $150,000, you cannot use the S, no matter what. Okay, I want to make sure that's really, really clear for you guys. If you have a loan over $150,000, you can use two forms. You can either use the EZ or you can use the regular 3508 form. And the difference between those is going to be whether or not you qualify for some safe harbors, okay? Whether or not you qualify for safe harbors, or if you haven't had any changes in your headcount or your salaries, all right? If that's the case, you can use EZ, but we have other videos on the EZ. Today is all about 3508S and explaining what's new about this form. The really big thing that I think is interesting and good for you guys to know is that the calculations have to be done correctly in order to have to be done correctly, but you actually don't have to submit your calculation documentation when you go to apply for forgiveness. That's kind of a huge thing, okay? The only thing you might have to submit is if you had a second draw loan and you never submitted your proof of your revenue decline, you will be required to submit that at the point of forgiveness. So if you didn't do it when you originally applied for your loan, you're going to have to do it when you apply for forgiveness, okay? That's the only documentation that's going to be required. The second important thing here, before we get into actually reviewing the form, is that this is not blanket forgiveness. And I'm sorry, I wish it was. This is not blanket forgiveness. So the SBA decided they weren't going to do it. I actually think from a fraud perspective, it's probably better that they don't. But I think it was just opening up the floodgates for too much. They probably saw a lot of fraud coming through and just decided hey, there's no way we can open this up and do blanket forgiveness. It's just not going to work. So I think it's totally fine. I think most people will still achieve full forgiveness under $150,000. It's just a matter of making sure that you're doing the calculations correctly and that you really got the right loan amount to begin with, okay? So those are two things that are really, really important that I want you to know right away. So what we're gonna do is go straight into the form and walk it through. I wanna show it to you guys, talk it through, point out certain key things so you know how to fill out the application. I did have somebody come to me that filled out the 3508S earlier on, but when it was just for $50,000 and under, and they put in the wrong number for their forgiveness amount. They put in their payroll costs instead of their full forgiveness amount, and then now they're trying to scramble and go back to the SBA to get the whole thing forgiven. So we need to get the right numbers in here. And that's why I want to walk it through and I want to talk to you guys about it and make sure that everybody's super clear on exactly what you need to put in each box. Make sure you subscribe to the channel because I've got some other really awesome stuff for PPP coming down the pike, and we've got some EIDL videos coming out as well. So if that's interesting to you, please subscribe. And again, more information just to help your small business succeed. That is the whole point of this channel, and that's what we want to do for you. All right, well, here is the new 3508S form, and they've done a couple things. So they've reorganized it a little bit, and if you remember from the Economic Aid Act, what they said in the act was that this was going to be a one-page application form. So you might notice that this is more than one page. It is 6 pages long, but one of the pages is a request for demographic information, which is totally optional. But then there's actually some specific kind of extensive instructions in here. Okay, so that's when I said that we've got some things to talk through. All right, so they've crammed a lot of stuff. They have a lot of stuff into this one-page application. But yes, it truly is one page. There's only the first page of this document is the information that needs to be input into the forgiveness form. All right, so let's just talk through it. Okay, obviously all the stuff at the top is really basic. This is stuff that you've had to fill out multiple times now if you got a loan, and then especially if you got a second loan and then you've applied for forgiveness already, potentially with one of the others. Some people have already applied for forgiveness before the second draw even came out. So all this stuff up at the top is kind of a no-brainer. We've already know what we need to put in here. They have asked you if you're applying for forgiveness on your first or second draw. So one thing to keep note of is that you do need to have applied for, if you got a second draw loan and you want to go ahead and apply for forgiveness for that one, they do want you to have already applied for forgiveness or do it simultaneously at the point of your second draw forgiveness application. Okay, so you can't go ahead and get forgiveness on your second draw before your first draw has been you've gone through the process to get that forgiven. Okay, so they do kind of want that to be in order, or for you to submit the applications for forgiveness simultaneously. All right, so I hope that's clear. So you'll go ahead and put in your PPP loan number and your lender PPP loan amount. That's pretty basic. And then you'll put in the amount that you got for your PPP loan. Do this you're going to do an application like this, even if both were under 150. You're going to do one form for your first draw and one form for your second draw if you got both. All right, so you just want to keep those two separate. They're two separate loans. If you got one PPP loan and then got an increase because of one of the allowable reasons you got an increase to the original loan, then you'll put the total amount of your PPP loan after the increase here. And then PPP loan disbursement date, this is the date you actually got the money, the date it was deposited into your bank account. And that is also the date that your covered period will start. Employees at the time of loan application and employees at the time of the forgiveness application. I cannot tell you how many questions I've gotten about this in particular. This is just a number. It's just a number. It has no bearing on your forgiveness. Do not think that this is FTE count and you need to be worried about this, okay? Because some people have applied for forgiveness way after their covered period has closed, and maybe they had to lay off people, or maybe they hired a bunch of people and they're worried that this number is going to play or affect their forgiveness. It does not. Do not worry about these. These two amounts are really just a straight count of employees. It's not full-time equivalent. You don't have to do any fancy calculation. You need to look at your payroll register or look at your active employee list, count how many names are on that. And you would have a number from the time you originally put in the application, and then do the same thing, count how many employees you have and put their number here. And if you are a sole proprietor, you will put 1 on here. If you're a sole proprietor with no employees, you need to count yourself as an employee. So owners who have a sole proprietor or partners, you would be considered one employee here, whether or not you have yourself on payroll or not. Okay, so don't overcomplicate this, guys. It's just not that complicated. It's just a basic number. It is for the SBA to gather this information, and they want to get a feel for how many people have fallen off, how many jobs were really lost, and maybe how many were saved. Okay, so this has no bearing on your forgiveness amount. And then you're going to put in your covered period here. Remember that you can choose, and this is actually This is for the first and second draw. You can choose anywhere between 8 weeks and 24 weeks. So if you wanted to close your covered period, let's say after 12 weeks and go ahead and apply for forgiveness, you could do that. So you just want to make sure you put these dates. These are date fields. From the date of the disbursement will probably be your first day, assuming you're not using an alternative covered period, which I don't think anybody's using anymore. But you're going to use the date of the disbursement as your first day of the covered period, and then you're going to choose the ending date. And that's going to be anywhere between 8 weeks and 24 weeks after the original disbursement date. And then if you received a first draw of PPP loans of $2 million or more, or your second draw of $2 million or more, click here. Really, if you did get more than $2 million, maybe if you got it together with your affiliates, then you would check this box. But really, if you have a $2 million loan, you shouldn't be using this form. So just FYI. All right. And then the amount of loans spent on payroll costs. So make sure you go back and you are very clear on everything that's included in payroll costs. I do have a video coming out shortly that details every single thing that you can include in payroll costs. So stay tuned for that. But what you're going to do is you're going to accumulate all those costs. So this is where we're saying you still have to do the work of doing the calculation on this loan. You still have to do the work of compiling some documentation to tell the SBA how much was spent on payroll costs. Remember, this is not blanket forgiveness. So we still have to do this work, okay? And if you need help doing this work, there are people out there to help you figure this out. I've been referring people to Upside Financial because they have a whole team of people that is able to help as many small business owners as need it to get this information in place, and they can help you get the right number in that box. This is critical because if you don't have the right number and then you're audited down the road, that could, change your forgiveness of, maybe you'll have to pay back some of the loans. So we need to make sure that the payroll costs are correct. Okay, so during the covered period, you put all of your payroll costs. Now this number might be, you would cap this number at the amount of your loan because it says amount of the loan spent on payroll costs. So if your loan was $100,000 and you spent $200,000 on payroll costs, you would just put $100,000 here. And your bank might have some sort of cap on their input field anyway. So even if you spent $200 and you put $200 in the field, it might cap you at to whatever the loan amount is. It might not. I don't think it's a huge deal if you ended up putting the $200,000 in this because obviously you're going to spend more than, if you only got 2.5 months of payroll costs, a lot of people are spending way more than their PPP loan on just payroll costs when you look at a 24-week covered period, okay? So put the amount of payroll costs in here. I would cap it at the total loan amount, but I don't think it's gonna hurt you one way or the other. And then a different number is the requested loan forgiveness amount. Now, this number here should be the amount that if you think you can get fully forgiven, it will be equal to your total loan amount. Okay, your total PPP loan amount. But if you believe you do not qualify for full forgiveness because maybe you laid too many people off, or you, maybe got too much money and you don't have enough qualified expenses to be able to get your full loan forgiven, you need to put the right number in this box. The banks are told to recalculate this amount, and you need to be able to have supporting documentation for the expenses that you had that were eligible for PPP. So this is where you have to look at this and really pull all of your documentation together and say, what is actually forgivable? Did I spend my money on the right things? Now, if you've been watching me, hopefully you know what you could have spent it on and you don't have to worry because you've been spending it on the right things and you've saved all your documentation and you have no worries. But this is the part that I really want you guys to be really clear. We need to get this number right. And in order to get it right, you need to have done the calculations, and you need to have accumulated all your documentation and make sure that you're in the right ratio of at least 60% for payroll costs, okay? Again, if you need help with this, get some professional help. Talk to your CPA or somebody who's been doing this forgiveness, or if you don't have somebody in your pocket already, reach out to Upside Financial. Their information is in the description box below. You will need to keep this documentation. I at the risk of being super annoying, I am sorry, but I'm trying to make sure that you guys have this right, okay? So make sure you get the right number in there. This is the number that they will assess for forgiveness. Not this number. You need to make sure this number is as high as it can be, and it will max out at the PPP loan amount. You can't get more money forgiven than your PPP loan amount, all right? So make sure you do that. So after you fill that out, really now it's all about just reading the certifications and making sure that you can honestly check the box or initial next to each one. I'm just gonna read it to you. The borrower has complied with all the requirements in the Paycheck Protection Program rules. That's huge. Have you complied with all of the rules of the Paycheck Protection Program? All thousands of pages of them? Have you? That's kind of a big statement, and you're checking something here that is, that's kind of a big deal. Have you read? And it says, have you program rules, sections 7A 36, 7A 37, and 7A of the Small Business Act, the PPP interim final rules, and guidance issued by the SBA through the date of this application. So they're basically asking you, have you been keeping up with all of it, and have you done the right thing? Well, hopefully you've been watching my videos, which I've been trying to keep you guys as updated as we possibly can. And hopefully if you are concerned about a cost, whether or not it's forgivable, you've done the research to figure out whether or not it is. So something to, keep in mind if anything's kind of iffy, and including all the rules related to the eligible use of the PPP loan proceeds, the amount of the loan proceeds that must be used for payroll costs, the calculation and documentation of the borrower's revenue reduction. So if you got that second draw loan, you had to prove that you had a 25% revenue loss in any one quarter between 2019 and 2020. So you need to have done that calculation correctly, and the calculation of the borrower's requested loan forgiveness amount, this amount. So this is huge. They are basically asking you, did you do the math right? Are you sure that you did it right? So you just need to make sure that you have done that. The information provided in this application is true and all correct in material respects. I understand that knowingly making a false statement to obtain forgiveness of an SBA guaranteed loan is punishable under law, including US 18 USC 1001 and 3571. I don't know what those are. By imprisonment of not more than 5 years and or a fine of up to $250,000. Basically, you can go to jail or you can be fined. I'm not going to read the rest. Are you trying to do this application in the right way? Are you trying to be truthful about the information that you've put in here? Okay, I'm going to leave that there. Go ahead and watch the fraud interview or the interview with Jeff Grant if you haven't watched that, talking about his experience with committing fraud on an SBA loan and going to jail for it. If you're curious about his story. This is another big one. Following the submission of the application, the borrower must retain all records necessary to prove the compliance with the Paycheck Protection Program for 4 years for employment records and for 3 years for all the other records. The SBA may request this information for the purposes of evaluating eligibility for the PPP loan or forgiveness. So they can still question your eligibility to have ever even applied. I think that's pretty key because if for some reason you may have spent it on eligible costs, but maybe you were not eligible to begin with, they can still come back and say, hey, no, you weren't ever eligible. And so that might, that's something to keep in mind. So make sure you're clear on that. Okay, so that's basically it. You just need to sign it. If you can feel good and initial on these two things, you can go ahead and sign it. And then this will be submitted to your bank. Now, everybody always asks me, do we need to fill this out and then just send it to the bank? Do I just send it to some random email address? It's no, your bank will have some sort of way to capture this information. Most banks have some sort of online portal where they're capturing this information electronically in their own format. But go ahead and fill this out because then you'll have all the answers. So when you go to your bank, you're going to have everything you need. Everything's already filled out and you already feel good about it because you've already read through everything. Okay. So that's what I always recommend for people. And then the next page is this demographic page. You can fill it out or you cannot fill it out. That's totally up to you. And then we get into the instructions. So I'm not going to go through everything here, but I do think that it's important to point out a couple things. Remember that this form is only for loans under $150,000 or less, and you will only use this form if you have a loan of $150,000 or less. If you do, you don't have to think about any other application forms. I think that's pretty important. And then it does remind you, each PPP loan must use a separate loan forgiveness application form. You can't use the same form for both first and second draw. Okay, so I've kind of gone through a lot of this already with you guys. This is where they mention that you need to submit the gross receipts reduction certification. Make sure that that gets submitted. And then this is just going through all of the fields that you needed to fill out on the front page. It's describing that. So if you needed to go back and look at that, you can. And then here's some documentation about the covered period. So if that was confusing to you, you might want to check that out. Remember, you have the selection of anywhere between 8 and 24 weeks for your covered period. It used to be 8 or 24 weeks, and now they've made it a flexible timeline between 8 and 24 weeks. All right, and then it goes in here and it talks about what is payroll costs and then what is non-payroll costs. So these are, remember, you need to spend at least 60% of the loan on payroll costs, and then the other amount up to 40% and no more than 40% can be spent on non-payroll costs. So those are listed in here as well. So one of the big things that I think is pretty important for considering when if you do have a loan under 150,000, is that if you still need to do the full-time equivalent headcount, wage and salary reductions calculations if your loan is more than 50,000 and less than 150, okay, and you're going to be using this form. You still have to do that calculation. You do not get any kind of full-time or headcount safe harbor now with the 3508S. I was under the impression that maybe the SBA might do that, give full headcount safe harbor like they did for loans under 50,000, but that's not the case. I was wrong when I was thinking maybe this is what the SBA might do. They might just make the 3508 a higher dollar amount. Yeah. All right, so for loans under 150,000, we still have to consider full-time equivalent headcount reductions and salary reductions to see whether or not they are basically affected and need to reduce the loan forgiveness amount. Because if you reduce headcount or you reduce salaries too much, you will have to reduce the amount of your loan forgiveness. We know that, okay? So what they're saying is that if you have a loan over 50,000 and under 150, and you can still use this form, you still have to do that calculation to determine whether or not you will have a reduction. And if you're going to do that calculation, you go and pull the worksheets from the 3508 application and you do all the calculations there, and then you come back here and put your number into this form. So there are going to be some people that are still going to need to reduce their PPP forgiveness amount for headcount reduction, and they're not telling you to fill out the worksheets and submit them to the SBA, but they're saying fill out the worksheets, make sure you get your calculation correct, and then come back and plug it into this one-page form. So I thought that was a little sad. I thought they were going to give full FTE safe harbor for any loan under 150,000, but that's not the case. However, loans under 50,000, you don't have to worry about any kind of headcount reduction, okay? So it is what it is. All right, so again, it's just talking about the fact that, remember, it is on the borrower to calculate all of this stuff correctly. It's not on the bank. It is the borrower to request the right amount. So the borrower is supposed to understand all of this information. Which is putting a lot of ownership on the borrower. And this is why I highly recommend getting some help and getting somebody in your corner. If this is totally outside of your wheelhouse and you don't feel comfortable and you need some help, definitely reach out to the professionals that can help you here. The borrower must accurately calculate the requested loan forgiveness amount and verify the payments for eligible costs. So again, that's on the borrower. It's not the bank's job, it's the borrower's job. All right, and just kind of one last little sentence down here. If the funds were knowingly used for unauthorized purposes, the federal government may pursue recovery of loan amounts and or civil or criminal fraud charges. So they've mentioned that a couple times on this form. Okay, and now the big thing is we get into documentation. And all of this information is meant to remind you that this is the documentation you need to keep in your files. Payroll documents for 4 years, all non-payroll documents for 3 years, but you do not need to submit any of this when you go to apply for forgiveness. You need to have it, you need to know that you've calculated your loan amount correctly, but you do not have to submit it to the bank. The bank is essentially trusting you. SBA is trusting you that you have done the due diligence, you are doing this correctly, and their power over you, I guess, if we will, so that hopefully we're all telling the truth, is that they have that audit time, that audit authority, that at any point in time they could ask you for this documentation and you need to be able to produce it. Okay, so keep this documentation. You should have it on file. All right. You do not have to submit it. The only thing that you will have to submit is if you got that second draw loan, you will have to prove out that you did have that reduction in revenue of the 25% that we've mentioned before in this video and in other videos. All right, well, that is the 3508S form. And I know that's kind of extensive, but I mean, you guys, this is the extensive one-page form. So I hope that clears things up for you, and hopefully it explains everything you need to know to go and apply for forgiveness when you're ready. And just keep in mind too that the banks are still implementing this new form into their system. So some banks I know are still closed to forgiveness right now as they implement these new rules. All right, so be patient with them, and we'll get these loans forgiven as soon as we can. Okay, so that form, I feel like I'm getting a master's degree in translating SBA forms at this point. So hopefully that will be put to good use in the future. I don't know. So hopefully that was super helpful. I know there's a lot of instructions with this one, so make sure that you read through them and make sure you kind of refer back to this video too, because I'm sure it'll be helpful when you actually go to pull up the forgiveness application and actually start walking through it. So I hope that's helpful. Please make sure to like the video if it was, and leave any comments below. All right, thank you. Bye.